Well, we have a rare treat today. I have a co-host who's a remarkable young lady. She's a psychologist, she's an author, she's a teacher at a place called Harvard up there in Cambridge. She's an entrepreneur, she's the founder of Groups. Groups is a platform focused on building connection, community, and, uh, and mental health, primarily in organizations, workplaces, not for profit organizations, all kinds of organizations. She's also a mom. She's my co-host today. Her name is Dr. Bobbi Wegner, and she's also a friend. And she introduced me to our guest today, who's Dr. Gary King, who I've had occasion to get together with and break bread with. And Gary, you're just a remarkable guy. I so enjoyed our breakfast together back a month or so ago. You've done so many things. You've accomplished so much. You have such a vitality and thirst for learning and doing. It's absolutely contagious, and it made me feel like an unaccomplished buffoon. but but I like to have high goals and role models, and boy, you touch on both of those. Uh, Dr. Gary King is the Albert J. Weatherhead III University Professor at Harvard University. He's one of only 25 people who hold that distinction. And he's also the director of the Institute for Quantitative Social Science, IQSS, which I found fascinating in our discussion. And I hope we can touch on some of the things you told me about the work you've done in our dialogue today. Uh, Dr. Gary King doesn't like to admit it, but he reigns from Long Island. He went to school at SUNY, State University in New York at New Paltz. He then went on to University of Wisconsin at Madison, where he got his MA and his Ph.D. in political science. He taught for a few years at NYU and has been at Harvard now since 1987. And just an amazing range of activities. The books you've published, the nearly 100 professional papers, just amazing output. So I can see why you're one of the 25 most distinguished professors at Harvard University. And Bobbi, you told me that I think you thought I'd really enjoy meeting Gary. You were wrong. I loved meeting Gary, and so glad to have you co-host with me today. So I'll turn it to you, Dr. Bobbi Wegner. Bobbi,
Wait,
what's going on in
wait,
your world, and why did you think Dr.
I know.
King and
I
I
wait a
was like,
should
second.
get
I'm
Let
together?
Jim
just
keep
happy to
going for a
take us all
while.
in. Yeah. So why did I think you guys
Sorry,
would get
sorry to interrupt.
along? For me, from that, the outside perspective, I'm just looking up at giants is what it feels like. And I've been lucky enough to cross paths with both of you in different capacities. And, I've gotten to know Jim over the past couple of years, and I've gotten to know Gary more recently in being part of IQSS. And the way I feel when I'm just sort of in the room at IQSS or just when I'm in the room with you, Jim, and your people is like the air just feels different, right? That's literally, I think, what I said to you, Jim, about IQSS and what Gary's created. Um, it's just like the people, the intellect, the curiosity,
Hmm.
the kindness, the openness, that like feeling of just like, wow, people are here to build something. And do it in a way that feels really positive and forward moving and hopeful and hardworking at the same time. And I know for you, Jim, you've spent your whole career doing this, right? And I've just sort of following you around and whatever places you seem to show up, and I try to show up too. But you've had this long career building all these different businesses, but still have been very focused on people and relationships and keeping good people around you while also kind of growing with the time. So I didn't know, but I thought you guys would get along.
So tell me about this IQSS.
So, the Institute for Quantitative Social Science, we study people and we study them scientifically, groups and firms and universities and companies and countries, and pretty much whatever people do. Um, what IQSS does in particular is it enables scholars to do better and more powerful and larger scale work, studying and contributing to society in ways, in scholarly ways that they could have otherwise. And so they tend to hang out here. Academics hang out at universities not because we necessarily like each other, but because our work gets better. I mean, we like each other too.
Uh-huh.
And IQSS provides provides that infrastructure that nobody else really provides. Um,
And one of the things I was struck by in our conversation, Gary, is that whole sense of community. And Bobbi, you're an expert on community, and you teach it, and you live it with groups, the company that you founded. Community matters so much, and you just said not just because we like one another, although sometimes we do, but we hang around because it makes us better. Is something about a community where there's challenge, where there's stimulation, where there's motivations beyond the apparent. And I mentioned to you when we got together, Gary, that I heard Professor Weinstein from the math department there at Harvard talk about the purpose of universities. And he said it's not just to teach. It's also to gather a lot of really smart people who have unbundled curiosity so that when a problem comes along, they're gathered in a community to try and solve those problems. And I think what you just talked about is an example of that. And I think, as I understand the work that you're doing, is to try and commercialize some of these great ideas so it just doesn't stay within that bubble of a community. It actually breaks out of that community to help a broader country, a broader community than just the university community. Tell us about some of the work you've done to try and bring people's work forth, to create businesses around it or spread the word.
So let me start with community, which you began with. We build the community here, and we show others how to use it. And although academia is similar to business in a lot of ways, there's a way in which it differs, which is in business, if we give something to somebody else, we have less of it. In academia, if we give something to somebody else, we actually have more of it. We learn from those we give services to. And so I'm quite proud that lots of other universities have copied IQSS, and then we try to lead more, and then they copy us more, and vice versa. And of course, they learn things, and we copy things from them as well.
Competition makes you better.
Competition makes us better. That's right. And so, in fact, actually, every 6 weeks or so, there's a provost and president and prospective director of a possible new institute that will come from some other university and visit Harvard, and we'll give them what is now a standardized tour of our services so that we can show them how to compete with us. Doesn't happen that often in industry, but it's sort of one of the great things we get to do. But beyond that, community is essential in multiple ways. So it's essential here, and then it's essential in making a difference in the world. So it's
And when you say community, you're not talking about a physical place.
No, although Harvard is more than a concept, it's also a place. I mean, there's more really high quality work, academics within walking distance of where I'm standing right now on campus than in any place on the planet in the history of the world. More people studying in depth something. Not always sensible things, but often. Science is, I mean, think about, actually, let me contextualize this. So if you look at GDP per capita, or how much humanity has learned, it's basically the same over long periods of time. Over the last 2 million years, I can't do this right now because if I spread my arms, you can't see what I'm doing. So I'll draw you a graph. From 2 million years ago to now, where up is more knowledge learned and down is less. Over 2 million years, it was basically flat. And in the last 400, it's gone like this. And the coolest thing is we get to live on that slope. If we were around 1,000 years, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, very little new would happen. But now, actually, a massive number of new things happens during our lifetime that we get to see.
And aren't we on the precipice of a real acceleration?
We are on the acceleration. That's right. We all see the new things. Maybe you're thinking of AI and things like that. Those are just the latest. That's all. We don't actually see a discontinuity or anything like that. We've been working on those exact things for many, many years. It's the exponential slope, and we get to see different things. When the three of us were born, guessing at our ages, there was no knowledge at all about whether there were planets circling other stars. None at all. We now know of 5,000 of them. I mean, I could go, of course, in area by area by area. There's so much knowledge that we've learned. And the cool thing is when we actually learn it. So how do you learn it? You learn it with science. So what's science? Science is not being scientific. It is not following the methods that I teach in my classes. It's a community of people acting in a special kind of cooperation and competition at the same time in pursuit of the same goals. The particular rules of science is what made that change from flat no increase in knowledge to exponential growth. So that's another example of community. And let me give you the last one, which is the one that you actually raised originally, which is, well, what about connections to the world? So IQSS tries to make it so that we're not just sitting in an ivory tower thinking great thoughts or thoughts we think are great and then sending them out. The purpose of the university, to me, is very simple. It is the creation, preservation, and distribution of knowledge. That's it. Turns out having the best students around keeps you up to date, pushes you, gives you creativity, new ideas, and things like that. So, and they're of course part of our distribution of knowledge. But all three of these things, the creation, preservation, and distribution of knowledge, help others. I really like having this conversation outside of, with connections across our different sectors, because we get to see different kinds of people. I mean, Jim, you could hire people I could never hire. You just pay them a lot more, right? No question. But I could hire people that you could never hire or probably never would. Somebody that might want to spend 3 years going in depth to prove a mathematical theorem or study something in enough depth to really figure it out that we would really need. You might even need it for business, but you wouldn't be able to do it because they're not going to make their quarterly numbers. Then they wouldn't even know what those numbers are. But when there's a flow of information back and forth between these different types of people, it makes both sectors better. So it helps us so what I have done myself is create knowledge in the university, interacting in science in the way that I described, in cooperation and competition with my colleagues here and elsewhere. I teach. So I teach. Why do I teach? Because teaching teaches the teacher. Have you ever had this experience where you explain something to somebody and they might have learned something when you explain it to them, but you definitely do. Right? So having the best students here anywhere is really helpful to our research mission because we learn better. So I develop the technology, I teach it, that makes the technology better. And then I like to go the next step. That hasn't happened that much in the social sciences and the study of people, and that is figure out how that technology might be useful in the world. And from that, get it to the world. How do you do that? Often what we do is we patent the technology through standard procedures, we create a startup company, and we figure out the business model, and off it goes. And so I've done that half a dozen times. And IQSS is now doing it more institutionally. We have an IQSS startup foundry that Bobbi is thankfully very involved in.
I remember Kelly Kimball, who's one of the leaders of the foundry, said, the first day I showed up, he's like, Bobbi, we just wrap our arms around you, and that's what it feels like. So there's technologists, there's academics, there's business people, there's VC, and they're literally just help you look at your company from the outside and say, what do you need and how can we support you? And then put people in place to help you get there, seeing things that you don't even see yourself. So as an example, we've been meeting, I'm super excited because we're building out the group's platform in a much bigger way right now. So looking at ambient data in teams and getting back to Gary's kind of idea around community and groups and health and functioning of a strong group. That's where the best learning comes from, right? When you can get a strong culture. So one question I was thinking, but I'll go there in a minute, is how did you create that, Gary? Because you have built this and there's such a strong culture, a strong group with these people from mixed industries coming together. But to answer your question, Jim, what are we doing there? We have a board of advisors that we meet with regularly, weekly plus. And so as an example, we sat down yesterday. We've been doing this for a number of weeks now, just going through this platform we're building. So what are we measuring? Having really big discussions around the use of AI within organizations, within teams, talking about things like privacy and consent and what do we disclose and who owns the information and how do we really do this to better teams and people ultimately, knowing that when we can build strong communities and build strong connection, it's not just improving business outcomes, it's improving the longevity and health of humanity and people, right? But how we get there is really, really important, because people's privacy is at stake. And so anyway, the point is we're having these great conversations that you don't get other places. But what I'm thinking, Gary, is like, how did you create an environment where you got these just like, I don't, just these like stellar people from all these different industries to come together, to give up their time, right? And to work with people like me.
I think one of the most important things that's going on in science these days is if you look at the architecture of universities, there's the humanity. Sorry, my hands are outside the windows again. In the I need to stand still. The humanities, which is not science, you study things. In the sciences, of course, we make inventions and discoveries and things like that. The social sciences are in the middle. And the most important thing to me that's going on in the universities is that the social sciences are being sort of taken out of the humanities, and at least big pieces of them are being put into the sciences. We study things like in the humanities, of course, but we also now solve problems. We come up with new ways of analyzing data. We come up with new types of data. We develop new theories that are actionable and produce new companies, and real value in the world. And so that's a really exciting thing. And when folks from the outside want to be part of that, we not only welcome them in because they get to see the cool things that we do, and that's great. But we also learn from them, and so we love to have those connections. So.
Welcome to a wonderland filled with tasty treats, gourmet goodies, and holiday cheer. Harry and David premium gifts were made to sweeten your time around the tree, and you might even have a little left over for Santa. I love connecting people, as you mentioned, Bobbi, and I just wrote down someone that I need to connect you to. Yesterday I had a presentation by a fellow who's been a longtime friend who's creating a company that I think would work terrific with groups. They use AI analysis of all different kinds of communication streams in it, let's say in a company, and they'll identify for a manager that these 5 people don't seem to be connected. They seem to be there's an indication there may even be some depression going on there. They're not really engaging with it. So all different kinds of indicators and dashboards about what the mood and sentiment in the company is, what the hotspots are. It'll even alert you to some potential inappropriate behavior going on that you might want to take a look at to head it off before it becomes an issue. Someone's just too casual in their correspondence. It seems it could be drifting in the wrong direction. So it gives management more tools to have their thumb on the pulse of how people are feeling and behaving in an organization. And it's all digitally developed and AI analyzed, and it produces all these kinds of color graphs. And so that's for another introduction. But it seems to me, Gary, that when you talk about pulling social sciences out of the humanities and putting it more in science, you've been at the forefront of developing social science tools to help people. And when you and I met, the subject of gerrymandering was much more in the news at the time. Obviously, we're getting close to an election, so it's a little bit behind us. But you developed a tool to measure the impact of gerrymandering, its effectiveness, its impact on voting, and to take away the wild assumptions about it and put science to it to help people make more informed decisions. Share with us a little bit about that.
My students and I and collaborators developed the methods to figure out whether a redistricting plan is fair to one of the political parties or minority groups or good government or the standards different government groups or good government groups or anyone would have. And so we figured out what the standards were, what fairness was, define fairness. It seems, gerrymandering seems unfair because whoever has the football gets to decide where the goalposts are, right? And that's the essential unfairness. Okay, so suppose you take that away and you say the reason why there's redistricting is because we have to have roughly the same number of people in each district. Otherwise, one member of the House of Representatives is representing many more people than another, and that doesn't seem fair. So you have to redraw the boundaries. But
which is why California has 40-something Congress people, and Wyoming has
right.
1.
But how do you draw the boundaries in California? right? And what are the standards? How do you know what's fair? So I came up with the standards for fairness. And then you had to figure out from the data, from just a new map, how do you know whether that's fair? And then fair to what? Fair to the political parties. That's one standard. Fair to the to minority groups, which are often intentionally gerrymandered out. Fair to different types of communities. Fair fair to the local community in your neighborhood, right? Like if there's a center of the town and that's split between districts, well, they might not get well represented. So anyway, I developed the standards, the measures, and then that is used now in most court cases in most jurisdictions. Unfortunately, the lawsuits don't stop; they keep going. From George Washington's first presidential veto until this day, it is the most institutionalized type of political conflict that exists. Nowadays, we have many more, but even when it's not a very partisan time, gerrymandering is usually partisan. I've worked on lots of other projects as well, but that took some number of years. So.
Yeah, it's making me think as I'm listening to you, Gary,
Bobbi?
and listening to you, Jim, too. When you initially asked me, Jim, like what made me think to introduce you guys, and it's like coming to me now, actually, as I'm just like listening to you both speak. But I was meeting with our product developer from IQSS yesterday, and she quoted Gary just by happenstance, right? She didn't even know we were doing this thing today, and she gave me this this feedback that came from Gary. And then we spent a little bit of time like discussing like what does this mean, how does it apply, how do you even think about this, and it was something like, and I can't remember, Gary, you might remember this, you said to Rebecca something like, don't be constrained by other people's constraints. Do you remember this? Something like that. And I was like, wow, that's so powerful, and how do you do that? And like, but I can hear in listening to you, this is in part, I imagine, why you've been so successful, because you don't play by a set of rules that exist. You can see a different set of rules that exist, and then you're willing to like put a stake in the ground and create it, and then create an environment or a technology or a tool or a system that represents it. And I can see Jim doing this too in his own way, right? You're sort of both hybridy in these different ways, but I think it's really kind of connected by this idea of like, don't be constrained by other people's constraints.
It's a good line if I said it.
What do you even think of that, Gary? Like,
Take credit for it.
what would, if you did say that, what did you even mean by it?
Well, I mean, technology enables us, quantitative social science technology enables us to develop methods and ways of doing things and ways of collecting information and using them that never existed before ever. So that opens up different possible ways of going that we would never have considered. So if you can do that, then we should think about where you might want to go if this new technology were possible. And then that motivates going to figure out what the technology is. So that's some of my work working with outside groups. So maybe I'll give you an example. So I was working with WHO, the World Health Organization. They wanted to know the causes of death in developing countries. Not an exciting subject, but an important one. In the US, when somebody dies, there's a death certificate. And you can add those up and you can say, oh, there's more people dying of this disease. We better put more money into that to try to do something about it. In most of the world, there's no vital registration or anything like that. People just go off to the bush and die. And they said to me, is there something you can do about this? Right. And so we came up with a methodology to solve that problem. And that methodology is now used by WHO and lots of others around the world. At the same time, this is the cool thing about being in an environment like at IQSS. At the same time as I was working on figuring out the cause of death in developing countries, I was trying to figure out what was known at the time as the blogosphere. Now it's social media, right? And the promise at the time was somebody could write something, and the first time in the history of the world, millions of other people could read it. It was supposed to be a big democratizing force. Not so sure it worked out that way, but that was important. What we realized was the reverse was not true. That is, there was no technology that enabled any one person to understand what millions of other people were saying. Right? How are you supposed to understand that? Right? And so I thought right at the beginning of social media, it wasn't even called social media yet, it was called the blogosphere. I said, we better develop that technology. And we tried all the existing automated text technologies that existed, and every one of them failed. It was just terrible. But because I was working on this completely unrelated problem, it turned out mathematically, after a year of trying to solve the automated text problem and failing, one day I realized that the solution to the WHO problem, figuring out the cause of death in developing countries, mathematically was exactly the same as figuring out what people are saying on social media. And it solved both problems at the same time. And that second one turned out to be technology. It produced multiple patents that produced a startup company called Crimson Hexagon. It's now called Brandwatch, which was acquired by Cision, which is quite a big company now. And so they go around the world and collect all publicly available social media posts and use the technology like I came up with originally to provide brand monitoring to companies or candidates and things like that. So that's an example.
And social media does change the social sciences dramatically, doesn't
it? It gives us access to what a lot of people think and to say. Right.
And it's measurable.
Yes, that's right. With this technology. That's right.
Mathematically
that's
measurable.
Right. That's right. We can say what lots of people choose to present. That's right. It also gives us other really interesting signals. So let me tell you one other story. This led to a different company. So I was working with two of my graduate students, Jen Pan and Molly Roberts.
And they went on to do pretty well.
Jen is at UCSD. Molly is at Molly is at UCSD. Jen is at Stanford. We were working on trying to improve that original technology that I came up with, just the automated text technology that turned out to be the same as the cause of death in developing countries. We're trying to work on this, and we thought, how are we going to improve this technology? We thought, well, one way of doing it is it's like you have a machine, right? You push it until it breaks. You run the car as fast as you can. You see where it breaks, and you patch up that piece, right? So we thought it happened that Molly and Jen both spoke Chinese, and so I said, why don't we try it in Chinese, right? Because the language works completely differently. So we tried it. We did that. We improved the technology. We were going to write a technical paper on automated text technology in Chinese. And then I said, why don't we go back to the website from which the posts or the Chinese language posts came that we got from Brandwatch, right? So Brandwatch, this company that I still, of course, I'm connected to, I have access to their platform. They give me data and stuff like that. One of the great advantages of having academia be connected to the real world.
Sure.
And there's a database that we were using which had the posts and the URL, right? And so they said, I said, go back and click on some of those posts. They came back to my office and said, there's something wrong with the data you got from Brandwatch. And I said, why? Because you click on the posts, sometimes it comes up, it looks sort of like a Chinese version of Facebook. They don't have Facebook in China, but it looks that way. Sometimes you click on it and nothing happens. I said, oh, that's surprising, right? It's on the web. So I would walk over to my computer, the one that's right here. And this is a newer version to be fair, but and we start clicking on the URLs and we see both of those behaviors. And we keep clicking. And then I click on one and it says, this post is being investigated. And I said, who investigates social media posts? What a crazy thing, right?
I wonder
That's
who
right.
that could be.
It turned out to be the Chinese government, right? What a crazy thing, right? So the post, which we had the text. The Chinese people could not read, but we could. In fact, we had the entire corpus of censored posts, millions and millions of censored posts that none of the Chinese people could read because they were not allowed to, but we could.
But what I thought was fascinating about that is, contrary to what I would have believed, you say that the party isn't that concerned about criticism, but they are very concerned about convenience.
That's right. About collective action. In fact, it's the community that you, Jim, care about. That's the thing they want to stop. Right. In other words, if you say on social media, the leaders of this town are all stealing money, they're putting them in overseas bank accounts, their policies are terrible, they all have mistresses and here are their names, that will not be censored. But if you say, and let's go protest, that will be censored. right? In fact,
But you got this dialed to the point that you could predict who was going to have an issue and who was going to hear a knock on the
yes,
door.
that's right. That's right. So let me tell just one more sentence here, which is, if you don't criticize them and you say the leaders of this other town are doing such a great job, let's have a rally in their favor, they'll also censor you. They don't care what you think of them. They only care whether you can threaten their rule. And community, collective action, convening has the possibility of threatening their rule. And so then we realized we had a very sensitive indicator of what the Chinese government cared about. And if they got worried about something, they would ratchet up the censorship. And nobody else could see it, but we could see it. We could see it in real time. And so somebody would be, so we could point to a dissident. We'd say, this dissident, he's going to be arrested. And 3 days later, he was. There's going to be a peace treaty signed between, or some kind of agreement between Vietnam and China. And there was. There's going to be some kind of scandal or something. We don't know the details of it, but it happens, right? So we could see into the future, sort of. That then becomes useful information for big companies or governments and things like that. And so in fact, we then created technology to formalize and scale that up very large. There's some things you can do in a university, some things you can't. For that, we had to create technology to go download all the posts and then go back to every one of these posts to see whether they're there. And of course, it's a government trying to prevent the flow of information. And so we had a network of computers around the world trying to ping them, right? It was a big engineering thing that we built in the university. But my workforce...
So you had to construct an enterprise there to deepen that work, to institutionalize it, to make it predictive and that you thought it was, but to make it institutionalized that it could exist and be funded in some way. And then I would gather that some people became very interested in that. But I think the funny part of that story, the interesting part of that story, is how bureaucracies work and how they couldn't just ask you for the data. You had to form a company because that's how they think. I can buy this, but I can buy it from a company, but I can't work with academia here. There's something wrong, and it changed how you behaved.
Right. So so first we tried to do it just within the university, and we built this big contraption. But my workforce, of course, during Thanksgiving and final exams disappear. And so when pieces of the infrastructure would come falling down, I'd be catching them by myself, you know. So yes, you're right. We found that the way to do it was to form a company. We tried to go to the U.S. government and said, hey, this would be really useful information. But it's not that easy to call up the U.S. government and say, here's information, which is the story Jim is referring to, right? It's, like, who do you call exactly? So that's a longer story, but.
Bobbi,
yeah, well, what I'm hearing in Gary's stories, one, the power of the group. It's like pattern. So it's interesting because I teach both in the Division of Continuing Ed, really focused on org, psych, and management, and then I also teach in the School of Education. Pretty much a very similar class, but with different focus areas, right? So School of Ed is focused on social change and using the power of the group and teaching educators how to bring people together to affect positive social change. It's very similar content, but in the Division of Continuing Ed, really focused on teams. But because we're human, social by nature, we're humans, the patterns are the same in terms of what we need from each other. We're hardwired for connection. There's certain patterns that come up. And so the other thing I'm really hearing from you, Gary, is that you're expert at seeing these patterns and then being able to sort of time travel into the future, seeing what's needed, and then kind of come back and building something to solve for it. I read Mike Maple's book last year called Pattern Breakers, the VC. He's I forget what VC he's at, but it was one of my favorite books. And he was saying the best technologists have that ability to time travel into the future, to see the problem that's coming down the line and then stay in the here and now and really look at the patterns and then kind of build something to solve for this future thing. And I just hear that through everything that you're saying is that's kind of what you do. But then you have the capability to kind of harness people together to make it actually all happen.
Hi, I'm Jim McCann.
And I'm George Everly Jr.
Together we embarked on a quest to co-write Lodestar, That journey began with countless hours of researching the most impactful self-help books out there.
Once we had our picks, we combined the science with the practical.
The result of our journey, the creation of a one-stop shop for the best of the best in self-help. So if you're looking to boost your career, build stronger relationships, or simply become the best version of yourself, Lodestar is here to guide you on your path.
But the value, I think, is cross-sector, right? So understanding that Jim has this problem, like if I didn't know that, I wouldn't work on that necessarily, right? Or you have a problem in a startup, right? It's the cross-sector, and then maybe in industry they wouldn't know that one of these problems could be solved, and we might say, hey, we could solve that problem. I didn't know anybody would care about that, right? So.
You mentioned before, I'll ask you, Bobbi and Gary, both, being part of an academic institution. Harvard and the other big brand schools have been criticized a lot in the last year or two about the size of their student body, the size of their endowments, and the size of their student bodies. How do you guys think about keeping the university at the size it is and not just saying, hey, we can afford to, so let's triple the population of our student body? And then the second part of that question is I got to speak with Dr. Barbara Oakley recently, and she teaches at Oakdale University in Michigan, and she also teaches the single most popular MOOC, M-O-O-C, online learning class in the country right now, in the world right now, called Learning to Learn. What role does those big teaching opportunities that MOOCs avail, and how do you feel about the student body size? How important is that to maintaining the specialness of the environment that you two both live and work in?
So the big picture is almost 2/3 of Americans don't get four-year college degrees. We need to solve that problem. The big picture is, to say it another way, the ones that get the degrees in the average classroom, 20 to 30, if the instructor says do the reading, 20 to 30% of the students do the reading. Those are the two problems that I think we need to solve. There's a separate issue is, well, Harvard doesn't accept very many students a year. Why don't we just accept 500,000? Those are unrelated things. I think we absolutely should be educating the rest of America and probably the world. We have the ability to do it. We do it online in a lot of ways. I think we could scale. I think we should scale. But one of the things that we are, and we, for the most part, these big universities, they're not actually colleges. They're really research institutes with attached colleges. Mm-hmm. We grow substantially in our research operation in most years, quite a lot, and the colleges basically stayed the same size. College is essential to the research operation, but it's a different thing. Well, so what's all that about with respect to your question?
And would that ratio, would tampering with that ratio risk the real purpose of that research capability?
I think if the goal is to solve some of the problems in education, we should solve some of the problems in education. If the way to do that is to change the ratio, yes, but I don't think that's necessarily it. So one of the technologies I came up with is a way to guarantee that more students in the classroom will do the reading at any type of university and college or high school or anything else. Okay,
please
so
tell
the
us.
word perusal means to read. If you add an extra L, it's perusall.com. So it was a technology we developed, and it's now also a startup used by almost 5 million students. And so what it does is it motivates the students through social connections. So normally when you go read, you read either a physical book or something online. What we do is we take 15 minutes from the instructor, and that's all at the beginning of the semester. And with that, we can make the 20 to 30% that does the reading as the defaults, we can make that 90%. And the way we do it is we make the reading a social experience. So you sign on to perusall.com and you get access to your book. So you look at it, it looks like an e-reader. Only if you have a question, you can highlight one of the words or phrases or paragraphs and say, I don't understand this. And the other students can try to explain it. And if they and then in threads, sort of Facebook style, they can work their way to the truth if there is a truth, or they can work their way through improving arguments if there is no truth.
Wow, that's really
and the social motivations really work, and we fine tune them so they work. So, for example, so let's suppose Jim is one of the students in the classroom, and he skips pages 60 to 67. Okay, so we know that, right? We can grade him based upon his engagement in the class. He knows he's going to be graded based upon the engagement. Okay, but he skipped pages 60 to 67. What we do is we send him a private, non-humiliating note that only he sees. It says, "Hey, you skipped pages 61 to 67. That's totally fine. Nobody's going to know that. But just so you know, your friends are on page 63 right now discussing what they find to be a really fascinating concept. We think you might want to go have a look." And he will, or at least on average, he will. And so we know how to basically create the reading engagement score and make it 100% for pretty much everybody.
Healthy peer pressure, right? We know around third grade starts social awareness like kicks in, and a lot of behaviors in classrooms decrease because social groups are regulating.
That's right. We are, as Jim started out by explaining, community is essential to human beings. One of the worst things you could do to somebody is put them in solitary confinement. So yes, there's a problem in education, but we're good not at educating millions of people at Harvard. We're good at developing the technology to educate millions of people, and so we should focus more on that. Absolutely, and that's an Perusall is an example of some of the things. One of the things we've come up with.
And where is Perusall now? Is it an idea, or it's a product? Is it commercialized?
It's a successful startup company.
And then, okay, you developed this technology. How do you build the company around it now, Bobbi? That's where you.
So we built the technology. We did research on it for about 4 years inside the university. We are the best incubator ever, right? We then
patient incubator.
That's right. Sometimes it takes years and years, right? Sometimes many decades. We patented the technology as is standard and required. We then licensed that to a startup company. Figuring out how to sell to academics is very hard because we expect everything to come free to us, which is ridiculous, of course, but nevertheless. But we're social scientists. We study people in groups. One kind of group is a firm. Right. Another kind of group are universities and colleges and community colleges and trade schools and things like that. So deeply understanding people in those sectors and making cross-sector connections enabled us to develop a business model that worked for all of those groups. I mean, literally, it's like free to students, it's free to instructors, it's free to universities, but we still make money. So so that we can stay in business, right? Because you have to work by the rules of the different areas, So,
Bobbi, someone was explaining to me the other day how the advances in tutoring are going to be all around AI, and they were explaining to me that an in-person tutor working one-on-one with someone in a few months' time will be less effective than a properly trained AI tutor who can notice that the 9-year-old isn't really focused or paying attention anymore. And the AI model can change to re-engage them, draw them back in, and not waste that next half hour going through a lesson plan that they're not paying attention to. Does that make any sense to you?
It's a question to be asked, I think, is what is the role with humans and technology, and where do people play where? What's the role people play and what's the role technology plays? And as we're building out groups within IQSS, we're having this conversation. It's such a deep, robust conversation. It's just we think human problems are still best solved by humans. So think about team dynamic issues. Having a human coach to actually facilitate that is going to be mission critical versus having an agent who's not reading the nuances. We don't even understand the brain completely as humans. How is an agent going to do this, right? But on the other hand, agents look at patterns really well. So how can we use the capability as a team psychologist agent who's looking at the patterns in teams, sort of what you were describing, Jim, the patterns of communication, the flow of communication, the sentiment of communication, the breaks in communication, and use that as a signal to actually bring people together to do the human-focused work. And then the humans come in, but what we see in our work is that nobody wants sort of coaching indefinitely, right? It comes in for a period and then they go away. So how do you truly marry humans, a human psychologist coach within teams, and an agentic team psychologist coach who are really, truly working in partnership to both assess team health and functioning, and then intervening with a human coach, and then providing the ongoing insights and behavioral nudges to increase the connection and cohesion. So I think tutoring is probably similar in some way, right? There's a thing there where I couldn't imagine my 14-year-old kid with ADHD sitting in front of like an agentic tutor, and actually he would find a way to game the system. I just know him in a good way. He's an entrepreneur. I love him, right? But he's not going to do that. He needs a real person that he has a real connection with that is going to kind of keep in his seat. But I think there's a way to use tools to make the tutoring more efficient and to have, sort of probably behavioral nudges in between sessions, to provide ongoing insights, to communicate outward, have dashboards, parental, school dashboards or something that facilitates the communication. But I just think those types of industries are going to be still requiring like the humans to do at least part of this work. But that's my opinion. I don't know. What do you think, Gary?
I think it's our job to make sure that this new technology can be used for advantage. Whenever there's a change in technology, it horrifies everybody. It scares them because at minimum, it's going to cause people more work before it causes them less work. Teachers in particular are horrified because they've fine-tuned a set of assignments over 20 years, and all of a sudden you could drop them into ChatGPT and can answer them. Well, and so, but the first reaction is tell students they can't use it. No, that's a mistake, right? That's a mistake. So
I think we got past that.
yeah, so it's really on the instructors to figure that out. Okay, so the question then is, how do you use this technology to take them up to the next level? At the end of the day, if we're talking about education, if you read the entire education literature, which I tried to do at one point, there's a summary of the whole thing is for students, it's not about the instructor, it's about the student. The more you put in, the more you get out. That's pretty much the whole thing. So if you use a large learning model to put less in, you're going to get less out, period. But if you use it to start at a higher level and get to an even higher level and to put more in, and it motivates you, that's way better. So, we used to teach people how to add up long columns of numbers very fast.
It's making me think, Gary, too, like when you think about sort of the quality of learning and then coding, like what we see at least in our classes, but granted, what I'm teaching is psychology based, right? It's organizational psychology, it's psychology and human development. But it's like the more we can increase like the personal so the way so the classes I teach, we're talking about sizes of classes, Jim, and like kind of scale. The classes I teach in the extension school are huge, like 250 people. It's like having a small company, right? So everyone's remote. They're global remote classes. So so when Gary was talking about showing up and you get I get more than I give, I swear. Like, I'm like, wow, I have all these like people sitting in my class. Every class I'm learning something because people are bringing real life challenges from their organizations. Most of these people are getting a master's in org psych part-time. We have pretty senior people. We have people new to the career. It's like a very mixed group of people. Jim, you've come to these classes. You're coming in 2 weeks to one of them. But the idea is like facilitating a large group for learning that are like synchronous, asynchronous, global, distributed. There's every factor. It was like an operational like nightmare a little bit to set this up in a way that was everything. But when you do it right and you have enough content, so every class, the structure is the same. I do the lecture at the beginning, and then we effectively structure it kind of like groups, like we call them growth groups. It's sort of a mixed bag. You show up, for the students who show up synchronously, and then we break them into small group discussions, and we have psychologists facilitate in-depth like discussion to help personalize the material to their unique learning like workplaces. And so we always get these great reviews in class because people are walking away being like, wow, I have tangible skills that directly translate. Yeah, they have to work together.
And you forced interaction.
So they're in a community in the small groups. So in these big classes, like we do the lecture in the large class. And then you get in these small groups and you're learning from each other. And then you're also applying the learning to your own unique situation and really personalizing it. And I think that's when like the best learning happens was you can apply it to yourself, right? Like how do you, at least in my field, like it's sort of more naturally, you can do that more naturally, I think, than if you're, doing math or something. But in my field, like when you can actually like walk away, be like, okay, apply this right away. it just makes more sense and people learn more deeply.
All right, let's agree to convene next summer at the south of France with Bobbi, and we'll make believe we're there because we're interested in
Perfect.
learning
Sounds
about
like a
French
deal.
culture. Bobbi, thanks so much for hosting with me today. Thanks so much for being a friend. Thanks so much for introducing me to Dr. Gary. I can't wait for our next conversation because I pulled out my notes I made after we met the last time, Dr. Gary King, and it's amazing. But let me ask, Bobbi, if people want to get in touch with you about A, taking your class, or B, learning about groups and exploring it for their organization,
Yeah, the
how would they
best
get in
bet
touch
is
with
probably going to my LinkedIn. So Bobbi, Wegner, Bobbi Wegner on LinkedIn. Super accessible there. And then groups, it's join groups with 2 O's. So joingroups.com. You can read about groups there. Thanks, Dan.
Super. And how do we keep track of what's going on in your world, Dr. Gary King?
You can look at my website, GaryKing.org.
I think we can understand that. We don't even have to spell it. Well, this has been a joy and a treat for me. Thanks so much for your time and your wisdom and your